This is number 3 in our views of tanning and the leather process. And as I begin, I'm going to put a slideshow on of some of this, and I'll say a few things. I just wanted to mention at one point that the tanning process that takes place in a tannery comes from the term tannin, T-A-N-N-I-N. Tannin is a substance that comes from bark, tree bark, in particular the bark of oak and hemlock trees. That's what they use for these processes mostly. And when you hear somebody talk about a tannery where leather is made, that refers to the tannin that's extracted from tree bark. And we're going to look at the excavation of a tannery that was once in Pittsburgh. And what is probably mostly forgotten is the north side of Pittsburgh was in a very important area for the production of leather. I mean, it had an awareness throughout the country that it was a place where a lot of leather was made, even though it started out rather small. For example, in 1788, Pittsburgh had exactly 2 tanneries. But as time went on, by the 1820s, there were 9 tanneries. By the 1850s, you could count 30 tanneries. By the 1880s, there were again 9 tanneries, but they were a lot bigger. They had consolidated, and around 1,000 men were hired in the local tanneries there. That's the kind of thing that put the Greensburg tanneries out of business, because the big city tanneries could purchase on a much larger scale, get the basic commodities a lot cheaper, and had a lot of guys to get things done a lot quicker. At this point, what I want to do is switch gears here for a minute. And we're going to, this is the cover of the journal of the Society for Industrial Archaeology. And in this edition, there was a article in a project that I was in on that took place in Pittsburgh. Ben Resnick was the principal investigator on that, and he did the report, which he worked up as an article for this issue of archaeology. This shows us Pittsburgh with the downtown Allegheny River going up here. Here is Hers Island, and right here is where the project took place. You can see here the island in the middle of the river, and right here is where the project happened. And the fact that Hers Island was nearby was very important, because Hers Island was a stockyard. It was a place where cattle were left off by the railroad for butchering. Thus, there were a lot of skins available that could be turned into leather. There was a railroad came right across over into this area, all over into the north side. The tanneries could be supplied by leather, by hides to make leather. From the 1870s, we see a map. Here is just the tip of Hers Island. This is the project area, and this area in bright red is the area that I was excavating in. This is a photograph looking down on the Allegheny River. This is part of Her Island. This was after the time that it was a stockyard, but the railroad bridge was still there that used to take the railroad over. The place that we were excavating was right in here. Right in here. See what happened to Hers Island now. It's populated with people. I bet they'd be surprised to know that where they live was once a stockyard. And right in here is where we were digging. This is Sanborn mapping from 1884. This area right here was in the 1880s the Adam Weiss and Company Tannery. There were several buildings. They were brick buildings. This was where tanning was done. This was called the leach house, which meant they put the bark, tree bark, probably oak bark, in vats with water. And the tannin was leached out of the bark. And then that fluid, or liquor as it was called, was then transferred to the other rooms where it was, the skins were put in the fluid or the tanning liquor. This shows the kind of thing we were working on. Surprisingly, this whole area was at one time in the 1890s, it had dirt dumped in there and then a big wood cement slab poured on top of that, and a 3-story building was put on top of it. For that reason, probably some of this is preserved. Otherwise, it might not be there anymore. But there hadn't been a lot of excavations done on tanneries, and that's why this particular dig had a certain amount of importance. This shows some of the vats in the condition that we found them, but we had to dig down to get to that. See this large long thing? That was a pipe. The pipes under these vats were made of wood and just drilled through. You can see some of the holes that were used for drains. And these areas were actually vats. The things you see standing up were the sides of the vats that the leather was tanned in. These vats were lime vats. The very beginning of the process involved putting the hides in water mixed with lime, and that prepared them. It opened the pores so that the hides could be receptive to the tanning fluid. That's a shot that I did when I was working there. These things standing up are the remains of the sides of the vats, which could be quite deep, sometimes 4 or 5 feet deep. And they've almost been totally wiped out because there was dirt piled in and then cement poured on top of it, all of which had to be removed before you could get down to this level. And you see holes, which were drains where the vats could be emptied. Here's one that still has the plug in it. That plug was to keep the fluid still in there until they were ready to drain it. Some of these processes were rather complex because it involved several strengths of the tanning fluid, which were passed back and forth to the different vats. These are the vats that they often used. They were made of wood, and you could buy these things. Here are more shots of the floor after we had done excavation. You can see these are the drains, and what the vats are just almost totally demolished. You can just see some of the sides that are left. Some more details. These are the drains that were underneath the floor. They were made of wood, wooden pipes. And this is a shot, frankly, that amazes me. I am very surprised that anything remained in this condition, but it was there. I think putting a cement slab on top of it did help. These were the places that the fluid drained through, and then on top of these would be put the wooden vats where the leather was actually made. And there's an awful lot more that I could say about it, but I'm not going to. I don't want to risk being boring here. So we'll say so long.